Alright, so this video will begin a series on basic C++ and potentially more advanced C++ for people that have prior programming experience. So if you come from languages like maybe Python or Java, this series might be useful for you. If this is your first programming language, I'm not going to go into basic concepts like variables. I'm going to go into how they're implemented in C++, but I'm not going to go into their basic concepts. So this may not be as useful. So we'll start with the classic program Hello World. And the only requirements are you need some kind of compiler. I recommend GCC. And GCC actually is used to compile C programs. So you'd use G++ as the actual command. But the package you want to install is GCC. So let's make a folder called Hello World, and let's make a file. You can call it basically whatever you want. Just use the file name extension CPP. So the structure, when you compile a C++ program using G++, it's going to look for a main method, a main function, and it's going to do whatever's in the main function. So we have to define the main function. How do you define a function in C++? Well, the first thing we have to do is consider what kind of value the function returns. So a main function really doesn't need to return anything. So the convention is that if your program executes and compiles correctly, then you want to return 0. So whatever program will look, okay, it's 0, which means no errors. If it returns anything other than 0, then that means that some error has been done. So essentially, you want to return an integer. It's 0 if everything goes right. So to declare a function that returns 0, or returns an integer, you use the int command, int for integer, and then you write the function name. And then you write parentheses to pass in any parameters. So the only parameters for a main function would potentially be command line arguments, but for this basic program, you don't need anything. And you want curly brackets to denote the function body. You need these brackets if you want your function to be more than one line. So to review, it's int main and then parentheses and brackets. Now, if we compile this straight up, so let's compile it with my other terminal. The command is g++, and you want to pass in wall, capital W wall, for warning all. You want to show all the warnings because you might have some unexpected behavior if we don't look at all the warnings. And it worked fine. Now, the program, on one hand, it didn't show anything, but we didn't tell it to show anything. But instead, it made a file called a.out. C++ is not an interpreted language like Python. Once you compile, you haven't executed the program yet. It just creates a binary called a.out, and once you run a.out, that will actually run your program. So let's see what's actually in a.out. It's just a bunch of garbage, really. There's no real way any human can read this and get any meaning out of it. So don't bother reading it. Just you can run it. In Linux, that's // and the file name, so // a.out. And nothing happens. Like I said, our function literally just defines our program just defines the main function, doesn't do anything. So let's do something. Perhaps printing out hello world would be useful. So before we can print out, we need some functions. We need some actual protocols for printing things out. One protocol is cout, which is printing out to the standard output buffer. So first we need to import the function. We don't have it yet. In C++, the way to import is to do #include. This basically means include whatever is in the file that I put next to it. And to import standard input-output methods, it's #include iostream. iostream, input-output. And the stream goes into string streams, which is pretty complicated, but essentially lets you print things out to, in our case, the command line. So #include iostream. So now that imports a bunch of functions we can use. One of them is called cout. Now I want to be careful here because you could define your own function called cout, and how would the compiler know which cout you're using? That's why you have to specify that we want the standard cout, the one belonging to std. And to do this, we use what is known as the scope resolution operator, which is the 2 colons. So this right here, standard or std : cout, means okay, I want the cout in the standard library. So standard cout, and then you put two essentially less than signs. What that means is anything after here will be pushed into cout. Notice how it's kind of pointing to cout. So anything after these angle brackets will be shoved into cout, which is, again, our output, whatever that may be, in their case, command line. So what do we want to see out? Let's see out hello world. We're putting it in quotes because it is a string. So see out hello world, and every statement in C++, excluding import statements and function declarations, and some other cases, any actual statements must have a semicolon at the end. So let's save this. Let's run it. Let's compile it. There you go, compiled. And now let's print it. So you may have noticed that, for me at least, there's an empty line in between every command, every prompt. But once we ran the program, it doesn't have the empty line anymore. And actually, if my prompt was different, so let's try this for my prompt. If we do out, notice that immediately there's no space. It just immediately asks for the next command. That's kind of inconvenient if you want your program to be read well, if you want the output to be read well. So what you want to do is you want to have a new line character, or a new line something in C++. So to do that, you do this again. Notice the angle brackets here. That means you're basically asking it to print multiple things. And you want to print out end line, which is basically a command telling C++ to make a new line. And once again, we have to do standard new line, std : new end line, because we have to specify what end line we want. So once we run this, let's find the function. Here we go. Notice how it looks all weird because it's on the same line. Yeah, that's why you want to make a new line for sure. And then out. Notice now the prompt is on a new line. So there you go. That's how you make a basic function. Oh, one last thing. So like I said before, we want to return 0 at the end of every one of our functions, every one of our main methods. Notice that I didn't do that before, but it ran just fine. That's because most compilers nowadays, they realize that, okay, if there's no return 0, it's the main method. It definitely wants to return 0. So you can put return 0, and it runs just fine, or you can just not have it. But for any other function besides the main, if you're going to say int, if you're going to say the function returns an int, you better have it return int at the end. For main method, it doesn't matter. Okay, that's how you make a basic hello world program in C++. Like I said, this tutorial was, even if you're a beginner, it's still kind of okay. But for my next tutorials, you really want to have some programming background before you watch them. So yeah.